Thanks for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast. You're in for a real good one today with my special guest, Happy Chichester, who truly is one of my all-time favorites, and I think you're about to find out why. Today, we're brought to you by Metro Chrysler Dodge Jeep and Ram at Chicopee. Visit their state-of-the-art dealership between BJ's and Big Y on Memorial Drive, or visit them at metrojeep.com. As always, I hope you like today's episode. Be sure to like it, share it, review it the best you can. Follow along on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook for regular updates on future guests too, because that would be absolutely awesome. And now, here's today's episode of Baxie's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxie's Musical Podcast.
During the 5.5 years that it took me to get through college, I found myself absorbing music like a sponge. I listened to an awful lot of music. I probably should have gone to class instead, but I preferred the music, much of which I discovered working in college radio. I also discovered a lot on my own or through friends. However, among that fat stack of music, there were plenty of records that would come and go, some of which I rediscovered many years later. There were some that I completely forgotten about, some aggressively so. And then there were those that I never let go of. And many of those records I've talked about in this podcast. Others I haven't, at least not yet. But they continue to be among some of my very favorites. And I often find myself reaching back again and again to some of those records, some of which have been with me for the last 40 years because they mean something. Interestingly enough, many of those records tend to share a few common elements, the most glaring of which happens to be exceptionally melodic songwriting, a production style that never gets in its own way or sounds dated. Add that to a creative sense of arrangement and rhythm, and you pretty much got me hooked. Among those bands that fit that bill includes an amazing four-piece band from Columbus, Ohio, known as the Royal Crescent Mob. Beginning in 1986, the Royal Crescent Mob were a hugely important band for me at the time. Initially, they were signed to a couple of independent record labels, received a lot of critical momentum, especially when they released their debut record, Omerta, a record that sounded like what would happen if James Brown had joined a rock band in the suburbs. They were freaking great, and for the next several years, things appeared to be going in exactly the right direction. Eventually, they would sign with a major label, Seymour Stein's Sire Records, which was a subsidiary of Warner Records. And although their sound would evolve over the next couple of years, their next two albums, Spin the World and Midnight Rose, along with Omerta and their 1988 compilation of earlier releases, Something New, Old and Borrowed, would be among some of my favorite records of all time. And that is absolutely no bullshit. Unfortunately, in spite of what seemed to be a concerted effort to sell the Royal Crescent Mob to the rest of America, they never quite got the traction that many people expected them to achieve, despite supporting tours with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, the B-52s, and the Replacements. Finally, in 1994, the band would break up following the release of their album, Good Lucky Killer. But the story hardly ends there. Lead singer David Ellison would go on to become a successful tour manager, working with Alanis Morissette and the Indigo Girls and the Goo Goo Dolls and many others. Late Carlton Smith would go on to play drums with 24/7 Spies and would continue working with Royal Crescent Mob bass player Harold Happy Chichester. And that's where this episode begins. Happy Chichester is a multi-instrumentalist and songwriter whose career since the Royal Crescent Mob has taken him from collaborating with the Afghan Whigs to co-founding the Twilight Singers with the Whigs' Greg Dooley, to forming Howlin Maggie, another timeless favorite, until finally he began to forge his own solo career, which yielded 3 incredible albums which you can purchase through his page on Bandcamp. Once you put into perspective the career he's had and then listen to the songs that he's written and what he's released, you begin to realize the amount of skill and creativity and sheer heart behind this man's music. How awesome is he? Well, let's just say that he was once heavily courted by Dave Grohl to join the Foo Fighters, but turned it down simply because he was too busy making other great music somewhere else. Here's the bottom line. Happy Chichester is a ridiculously talented musician whose songwriting ability is insanely underappreciated. And I have felt that way for nearly 40 years because I have absolutely loved everything that he has ever done. And his music, whether solo or with other people, have continually been a part of my entire adult life. And so to speak with him about his music and about some of the other things that he's been involved with over the years has been a real thrill and something I've wanted to do for decades. This is my conversation with Happy Chichester on Baxie's Musical Podcast. Gotcha.
There you are. Hey.
Awesome. Great to see you. I'm so happy to have you. No pun intended.
I'm very honored, Mike. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
Well, let's get through this first, and then let's see how well honored you are.
Okay. Cool.
I really am so happy to have you. I have not just liked your music since the beginning. I have loved your music from the beginning. In fact, I from the very first day Murda came out in '87, we began playing "Get on the Bus" in college radio, and and I've been hooked ever since. In fact, here it is. It's still in great shape. It's my copy of Murda. I freaking love that stuff, and I mean, and what I loved about it is, I could still play those records today. I could play Spin the World or Midnight Rose. I mean, they still sound like they could have been made yesterday. And I love that about that band. It's like it never aged for me. It always sounded fresh.
Nice to hear that. Really is nice to hear that, man.
When you're a fan of a band and it connects with you, and it's like one of those things where, back in the '80s, there was like so much exposure to music, but there are certain things that just connect and never let go. I'm sure you must feel the very same way about certain bands or certain records. It's like you just can't shake them. And those few Royal Crescent Mob records were certainly that for me.
Wow. I was talking to B this past weekend, the guitarist, and I told him about your podcast, and and we were sort of remembering, playing in Boston and playing in Massachusetts, and it brought back some fun.
Yeah.
Nice memories. Yeah.
So I saw you guys. So I went to school in Milwaukee, and I remember you guys playing an afternoon concert on at the Student Union, and it was just so much damn fun and so energetic that I even bought a $10 shirt when I absolutely I didn't have $10 to spare. It was
I know what that's like.
It was a blue shirt, had green lettering on it. I literally wore it until the thing, just fell apart and melted off of me. But I remember watching you guys playing and specifically watching you, because it just seemed like you specifically had this air of you were having the most fun of your life playing even an afternoon show at a student union.
Yeah, I was having the time of my life, without a doubt. Playing with that band was really a joy. What a joy.
Tell me a little bit about that, because it seemed to me at the time, there was a good push to get you guys some traction. And even after, Spin the World was getting pretty good reviews and all this stuff, it didn't quite seem to catch. And I was always very surprised by that, because, I mean, it was such a great band. Tell me a little bit about those years playing with those guys.
Yeah, I would say that the best, just my my little radar, not the most powerful in the world, but I had this impression that the small group that was working Omerta at Moving Target Celluloid, they were really tight knit, and they really got the band and understood the band, and that seemed the best fit in terms of how the music, the band, the promotion and label and all that stuff comes together with the audience. Then later we signed with Sire, which was amazing because Seymour Stein signed us, came out to see us at CB's, and he was one of those, I think, my impression was he was just one of those artist supporting kinds of people who thought, well, they know the best what to do about the music. So I wouldn't have the foggiest idea how to market a band, and especially a band like Royal Crescent Mob. I mean, I never have been the one to look after the business end of things. If anything, that would be David, our singer, and he's still doing that. Really, he's like, last we talked, he was on the road with Sabrina Carpenter, tour managing her, but he's tour managed everybody from Alanis Morissette to Jay-Z to Camila Cabello to, I mean, He's always jet setting around the world. But you asked me just about those years, and I could say that it's probably the favorite band experience that I've had, because that was really a band, one for all for one sort of vibe. I don't know if you know like the background story of me and David and B. The very first record we did was an EP called Land of Sugar, and that had Bill Schweers, who we had all played in a band here in Columbus called Ray Fuller and the Blues Rockers. Ray is still playing around. He's still doing what he does, blues rockabilly sort of thing. When I used to be on Twitter, I once saw a tweet from Chuck D from Public Enemy, who's my favorite of the hip hop world. And he had a picture of Ray Fuller on stage at Legends in Chicago, Buddy Guy's place. And Ray Fuller was playing, and Chuck D was there and loving Ray's band. But Royal Crescent Mob, we all played with Ray. I guess I left to go back to college to study art and stuff at OSU, which didn't last that long, because then we sort of reformed as Royal Crescent Mob. And next thing you know, we're recording that first album. And, I just said, I got no time for college. I'm gonna make records. I was making these kinds of announcements to my parents, like, okay, I want to be a songwriter. I'm going to quit college and join a band, be in this band. That sort of all came out of that. Bill was on the first thing. He was going to hold down the drumming throne until we found our drummer. And we went through a lot. We actually played our first real big out of town gig, was playing at the Rat in Boston with the Neats. And we had a drummer named Andy. And it took about, I'd say from that point, it took another 6 months to find Carlton. And when Carlton joined the band, that was it. It was all locked in, and we all knew immediately the first time we played with Carlton that this is it. I mean, and that was just magical. That was, that was a summer of my life, really. That was like really that summer we were working on Omerta, and Carlton joined the band, and you could just see our crowds were getting bigger, and lots of people dancing.
Well, that's one of the things that is so interesting about bands and chemistry. I mean, you really do take on the persona of all members of the band. A guy like Carlton comes in, you're playing bass, the two of you are locking in, and that shit's funky as hell. And it's just like obviously the chemistry between you and Carlton had to be very powerful, because it drove that whole band. And you guys continued to play until he died, just was it last year or whatever. But nevertheless, there was something that organically was created between the two of you that had to be something pretty powerful.
It was. I mean, we really did hit it off immediately. And when we talk about it, everybody agrees that was the situation, that we had been this sort of smoldering kindling. And then when Carlton came, it just burst into flames.
Yeah.
It was really beautiful.
One of the things that I had read about you in other interviews was that you are primarily a self-taught musician. And in fact, you even recorded music on your own as a kid. But your first primary passion was playing the drums. And that it's something that was very important to you early on, and even continues. Tell me a little bit about that, and the role that drumming has played in how you still create music.
Yeah, drumming would be sort of a daily practice, and not just for like keeping chops going, but really as a practice, I guess, almost spiritual, musical energy. I would consume way too much news, particularly political news sometimes. It's like having too much caffeine or something, like laced with poison. And I would need to go kind of like just work. After an hour of drumming, you feel free and clean from all that stuff. And also another thing that I would add to my practice is, at the beginning, I would verbally dedicate to someone my drumming, because it's a way of sending that benevolent energy, that thing that I would get from drumming, sort of like a way for me to kind of share it, or at least try to send it.
I can totally relate to that because I've been playing drums since the age of 12.
Oh,
Mostly alone in a basement, but occasionally I've sat in with other people. And so I mostly play for the purpose of like funneling energy and aggression. And you're right. There does seem to be like a spiritual aspect to it that like once you've been doing it for a while and you're sweating and everything feels like it's supposed to feel, it's like it unlocks a door like
yeah,
creatively to other things. It's hard to really explain, but I think clearly it's the same situation for you. It's like nothing else.
exactly. It does open that door. That's always how I felt. And I would start getting music in my head after these drumming sessions, and I still sometimes do that a little less so now. The last 4 or 5 years really focused on electric guitar.
Hmm.
And I've been trying to apply some of my drum practices. What's the word I'm looking for? That are like just not so much practice techniques, but routines. Like using a metronome or starting out with some rudimentary things, and then I don't know, balancing. I
Yeah.
would just for some of these practices to guitar now, and then when the pandemic hit, everything was locked down, and I did get a chance to play drums a little more for a while and recorded a bunch of things. Uh, haven't come out. Well, one of them did come out, but and a lot of singers, a lot of musicians started out as drummers, and it really unlocks doors on, I think, all levels. If you're a musician and then you start with drums, then you're getting a sense of right, left, independence, so that you can move from drums to piano or guitar, or I don't know. It's not quite doesn't transfer quite to say a woodwind instrument. You're not gonna have a head start as an oboist if you start on drums, maybe, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a door opener.
Yeah. There aren't a
It's
whole
cool
lot
to
of.
hear that you play drums,
Yeah.
Baxie. That's really great.
Well, I imagine that the same appeal would not be the same if I were like playing bagpipes, to
Yeah,
chill out. But
exactly.
but it is. I mean, there is something so hypnotic when different parts of your body are doing things independently of everything else.
Yeah,
And when I heard that's kind of how you started and how it still continues to play a part in music for you or has over the years, I just thought, oh my God, this is fantastic. This is great.
oh my gosh, and Carlton, I absorbed so much from him. I have this other friend in town, Jimmy Casto, and for a little while, because I actually did study drums in school. That's the only kind of like music that I can sort of fluently read a little bit. But I would take something that Carlton had showed me, and I'd go to Jimmy Casto's house. I'd be like, check this out. Carlton showed me this beat, and he'd watch me. He's like, give me those sticks. And he'd sit down, he'd try to play it. And he kind of came from more of a jazz world. And I'd see how he would flip patterns around with the hi-hat and the right hand. And so he'd try to play the Carlton beat that I was showing him. And then he would do it differently. And I'd watch him, and then I'd go back and try to learn it the way that Casto would play it. And it's sort of like between those two guys, I'm getting like free drum lessons for years. And it's not like I was scamming them or anything. I think most musicians that I know are very generous with their knowledge and
Yeah.
experience, and are eager to share and show you stuff. And that's one thing I love about Columbus and this community of musicians here is this a lot of that spirit amongst the music community.
Yeah, it sounds like the kind of situation where everybody's willing to help everybody else and not be divided by jealousies and insecurities. It just sounds like a really inviting place to work.
Yeah, for sure. That's
Yeah.
been my experience. Even when I was a kid, because when my family moved to Columbus, I was 9 years old and felt really displaced and disoriented. And it was only a matter of months before in school they asked, "Would you like to learn music, an instrument?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, I want to play drums because I love Ringo, And I was a little kid, and drums, oh boy, Animal on the Muppets. That's who I wanted to be.
I find myself going down this YouTube rabbit hole where I'm just like watching drum solos for like an hour, and like 6 hours later, it's like, Jesus, I gotta go to work.
Yeah, yeah, I'm in that rabbit hole too. We might see each other down there
Yeah.
sometime for sure.
So one of the things that I'm really happy to hear is that you guys in Royal Crescent Mob stayed friends throughout the years, and that the breakup in 93, 94, didn't sever friendships. I mean, you left for other reasons. What was the reason that the Royal Crescent Mob eventually dissolved?
Well, they did tour for another 6 months after I left, but I left in early '94 to start Howlin Maggie, because I had all these songs that were sort of unusable within that Royal Crescent Mob band, and they didn't, they were less and less comfortable with me bringing songs in, and I felt after that number of albums, and every band has its arc and lifespan, and I just felt like we kind of come full circle from Land of Sugar, the first EP, to the last album, Good Lucky Killer. I
Hmm.
felt like we had really come full circle. We had explored the full range of the band, and it was a good time for me to jump off and start, because I really wanted to. I've always been a songwriter, even before Royal Crescent Mob. See, they kind of got me in there on a ruse too, but they told me, they knew that I was really always writing songs and always focused on songwriting, and my attitude was always very open, that you can play covers and make a living doing that, but I was more interested in, and they were too, really.
Yeah.
That's sort of what brought us together, was like, we want to write our own material and record and put out albums, and we had done that. Yeah, and I think we've done that fairly successfully. It makes me very happy to look back at that experience and to think about how we'd found each other's strengths and brought each other's talents and strengths out of each other. We helped each other to become better songwriters, and we learned how to pair up to work on certain things. One day David comes over, we go into my music room, and in about 30, 40 minutes, we wrote this song called Happy at Home.
Hmm.
And next thing you know, Sire Records was just crazy about that song. And it was like, they get into this bidding war with the label we were on. They wanted to have that song,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, by the way, I have that too. I, I've got that one too.
Yeah, you see, Seymour Stein didn't get that song in the deal, and
Yeah,
Moving
boy.
Target kept that, but we moved from Moving Target to Sire.
Yeah. You mentioned the Howling Maggie, the two records, which I absolutely love. Honeysuckle Strange is a great record, and Hyde is great too. But when I hear those records like Miss Universe, or even the song Alcohol, which I think is like, it's got such an incredible, I don't know, it's like a Jeff Buckley feel to it. It's like, it's such a good song. When I hear those records, I really hear this amazing progression of your songwriting. Prior to that, I could identify Happy at Home. I could Go into the Hospital, or Corporation Enema. I knew those were your songs. But when I'm hearing the Howlin' Maggie, I'm like, man, he's taking this big giant leap forward. Tell me about those two records.
Two different lineups. The lineup that recorded the first Howlin' Maggie album, Honeysuckle Strange, came together the 1st of July, '94. So that was really only like 6 months into really starting to play gigs. Because when I quit the mob, there was a little bit of bad blood. I couldn't get a gig in Columbus. Our first gig, I had to go to Newport, Kentucky, right outside of Cincinnati. We were on the bill with a band named, remember Brainiac?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, they were on the bill, and we had to kind of work our way back. It was like starting over in some ways, as far as building an audience and getting yeses to asking if we could get a gig. Even though I'd been with this pretty successful band in town that could book a gig easily, I had trouble at first booking the gig. But that lineup came together, and it was amazing how fast the recording, like all that material, came together. Because that summer '94, I remember we played our first gig in July, and then by August, mid-August or early August, I had us in the studio recording, and wrote Alcohol, and just it was moving. That was a case of kind of the band was having its honeymoon, and so recorded everything really fast. And then within a year, before that lineup had even been together for a year, we got an offer from Columbia Records. So that was pretty amazing,
Yeah.
But we basically had all that material recorded before Columbia signed us.
So my understanding, and correct me if I've got this wrong, because it's very likely I do. Between the first and the second album, my understanding is that you bought your contract out from Columbia for the
That's right.
second album. It came out a couple of years later. What happened with that situation with Columbia? Was that particularly difficult to get out of?
No, it wasn't so difficult to get out because my lawyer gave me this key man clause in the contract. The label kept wanting more material, and I kept writing more songs. And in fact, there's this lost Howlin Maggie album back there somewhere. We recorded some demos and some live things, and it's probably enough for a whole album. And then the drummer and the guitarist quit because those guys, they were, I think, much more attached to being on a major label than I was. Having been with Royal Crescent Mob, we were dropped from Sire midway through like the second album tour, and I had a little more understanding and ability to contextualize that. It wasn't like the end of my life,
Right. Right.
The first time with Sire, it was devastating to some extent. I mean, it wasn't devastating for me so much because I always think of things as like, all right, well, tomorrow I'm going to get up and work on songs. I'm going to play my guitar and play drums and keep writing songs. But that, my second time around with the major label, I could see that the label didn't really know who we were. The people that we had signed with had left the label, and we were sort of, hanging there. But I wanted off the label because I didn't feel like it was going to help us to have an album that the label didn't like. I wanted to just keep working and get it out. This is, of course, also, and at the time, iTunes came around, and the internet was supposed to be leveling the playing field and making things a little easier to for self-promotion and distribution. Right. All these, it was supposed to be empowering the artists, and we had gotten the means of productions. We put Pro Tools in the studio and had an ability to record ourselves. So, but those guys left. They just had a different, trajectory, and I had to sort of start up. I wanted to keep the band going though, and I wanted to get these songs out, which is what we did. So I took my share of the buyout and spent it on making Hyde.
So in the midst of all of this, while this is all going on, you also develop a working relationship with Greg Dooley and the Afghan Whigs. Now, the Whigs are a great band. There's no question about it, but I have to believe it is a very, very different situation than what you had been dealing with, either with Howlin Maggie or with the Royal Crescent Mob. Very, very different. Tell me about what those differences were. Tell me what it was like to work, with him. I mean, clearly very much a band leader as opposed to being like a part of a band or leading your own band. Tell me a little bit about that relationship with him.
Well, in the studio working as a sideman, it was very easy because Greg just liked what I did. And in the case of like something like Gentlemen, I just went down to Memphis for a couple of days, and let's say like a song like Brother Woodrow, I had been roaming around the stacks at Ardent Studios and saw the keyboards that they had. They had been setting up this clavinet for Primal Scream that was coming in after that. And I was interested in looking at that keyboard and playing it, but I saw a Mellotron, which I had only played one time before, and I said, "Can you bring the Mellotron down and hook it up for me?" And as soon as they did that, and I started playing, Greg just like they put on Brother Woodrow, and I just did a one take. It was a lot like that. I can tell you, I just love Rick McCollum. He is such an incredibly talented guy and fun to work with. As a musical brain, he's just always like shooting sparks, and so that was incredibly fun.
Yeah.
And also on the Gentleman album, I mean, I just also Steve Earle. I love that guy too. He's he's an incredible drummer. And because I love drummers, I just want to say I think he's one of the greatest drummers, rock drummers I've ever worked with. Got this thing that's really powerful and rock style, but he also has this swing that's very like it's sexy, but also like aggressive and rock, and it's got this sort of like just this swing, man. So yeah, I was having fun for sure.
I was also listening to that the first Twilight Singers record a while back too, which is Greg and Sean Smith, and it's maybe the darkest record you've ever been a part of, but it's so beautiful in a way, and you're all over that first record, and you know, that's one of those things that I wish more people have heard because it's fantastic. Tell me about that. I know you were very close to Sean when he was alive. Tell me about working with him.
Well, I wish we had like a couple hours right now because I think about Sean all the time and just love that guy. And the last tour we did together, my wife was our tour manager. She booked it and she came out and she was just amazing. There was this show at Cameo in Brooklyn where after the gig, I'm packing up gear. Sean is talking to fans at the bar, and my wife is trying to get paid. And they tried to stiff her. She's from New Orleans, though. She prevailed. She's not only smart and beautiful, but charming and business minded. And she got our money. We got the van loaded, and that was the last tour we did together. And that's like 10 years ago. And it's hard to believe that he's been gone for 5 years.
Wow.
Because I love Sean, and writing and working with Sean was really easy. I was mentioning earlier about how Royal Crescent Mob, we kind of could bring out different talents in each other, and Sean was like that for me. He appreciated one thing. He had this knowledge and appreciation for Ohio music. So even though I could be heckled, at like Chop Suey in Seattle, the crowd could be heckling me if I say I'm from Ohio. Sean looked at that and recognized, because he loved Roger Troutman, and Zapp, and he understood a little more than most people what it means to come from Ohio as a musician, and he could bring the best out of me too. And then when we would write, sometimes it could be so easy. I mean, really so rewarding, so easy. Like I would go out there to work on Shield of Thorns and get to his place and start plunking on the piano. He'd be in the kitchen and walk in and say, "What is that?" And I would say, "I'm just messing around, making it up." Because, "Well, can you do it for like 3.5 minutes in the studio tomorrow?" And that's what would happen. And then he would get on the mic. He was amazing. These great bebop soloists or freestyle rappers. He had this incredibly powerful talent for improv and extemporaneous songwriting. He would just come up with stuff that would be keeper right off the bat. For instance, he told me the story of coming up with Battle Flag with Pigeon Head. He said he woke up, his routine was he'd get up and he would walk down to 7-Eleven and he'd get a big iced tea. And then Steve Fisk had an ADAT ready for him, and he'd get back from that. He threw in the ADAT. He'd been listening to Ice Cube, I think is what he told me. And he starts up the track and he just starts singing, "I said hallelujah." And then that's it. Sean was just like, we went on Jimmy Fallon and played a song where he couldn't remember the words. So he just made up new verses on the spot on live TV. I mean, he's really most singers I know would be terrified to go on live TV and not know the words to the song. But Sean was just like, we got back in the van to go back to the hotel after that. He goes, "I just made up new verses." Incredible. Jeez, that guy.
That's unbelievable. Yeah.
Not only that, I just really loved him. He's one of the funniest, smartest, most charming, lovable people I've ever met in my life. Oh my gosh.
I want to ask you a little bit about your solo albums. There's the 3 of them are out there. In fact, you're not gonna believe this. I was on Amazon the other day, just kind of just looking around, and there's a copy of Torchwood Loop that is now selling on Amazon for $257, and I'm pretty sure I shit you not, $257. Now the copy I bought was a hell of a lot less than that, but
Yeah.
I could make the argument that Motorbike alone is worth at least half that amount. So, uh,
Thank you.
no problem,
Man.
no problem. But you've got those 3 records. The first one, was the live one of the Aladdin Theater. The other 2 are out there too, and they're just wonderful. I, I know that you've got songs written, stacked up, and I understand that you have been working on releasing another solo record. But that's a whole lot easier than actually completing a new solo record. Tell me where things stand with that. I mean, it's been a good long period of time since you've released your own stuff, but how close are you to getting there?
Well, we've sort of trickled some things out on Bandcamp. There have been some releases there,
Right.
and then 2016, we did put out a 12-inch single. It's like 33 and a third RPM single, which we learned in 2016. People don't remember the 80s like I do, because that was 12-inch single, 33 and a third RPM. That was like the best sound quality. I've got a whole ton of them. I mean, I've got a bunch of them. So it didn't sell that great. Plus, we're our own operation. My wife and I, really, my wife Laura runs Popfly. I'm more the music side of things.
Right.
But then in 2017, she had a health crisis, was in the hospital, and we've sort of been working with that for a while and adjusting things as we go. It's an adrenal deficiency called Addison's disease. JFK had Addison's, and then just because my goal last year was to 23 to get the album done and out, and then in spring of 23 she was diagnosed with breast cancer.
Mm.
And so we've been really like, between that and Addison's, I've been focused for the last several years. Like she's brought out the caregiver in me. Like right now she's got 17 spinal fractures, and
Oh my
so
God.
I do a lot of a lot of my time is as a caregiver, for my wife. We've been together a long, long time, and we love each other so very much. And she's always been really such a champion of my music, and she would push me to keep working. So some of these songs now, I would like to get them out. But like, for instance, there's this one song that I wrote for her, and it's a real up tempo like rocker. It's 240 beats per minute. And when we were going last year, we had this kind of long commute to Delaware, Ohio for her chemotherapy infusions. And she would always put that CD in the car and just like crank it up to the sky. It's like, I'm getting ready, getting psyched up. And then just a couple months ago, I recorded a drumless version of that same song. And then also this year, when she had to start radiation in April for like a month. And that first day driving up there, I could tell she was really subdued and scared. That was the main thing, because it was new, and chemotherapy is one thing and zapping you with radiation is another. And she's been through the ringer, really. She's been doing such hard work. We got a little bit of good news this week on the whole thing.
Oh, good.
Thankfully, I mean, because she's just been through the ringer. But that first day of radiation, when we're driving to Delaware, and she's like in the car, I'm driving, and she's looking for that CD, and she couldn't find the song that I recorded for her. So she's, well, let's see what's on the radio. And she turned on the radio, and immediately she goes, "It's you." And they were playing Alcohol on the radio station, and she just cranked it up to the sky.
That's
And she's
great.
like, that's what I needed to get ready for that whole thing. So a lot of like, we really, because she runs the business, she just hasn't been able to do that end of things, to do a release. And there's been a lot of challenges just personally to
Sure.
try to finish, because I actually do have enough material to put out an album and then some, and I keep adding to it. It's just really like life has
Yeah. No.
has different plans sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I wish you luck with that. But yeah, because
Thank you.
we've all kind of dealt in situations similar to that. But so I wish her all the best.
Thanks so much.
One of the things I needed to ask you about, there's a couple of things I still want to go before we wrap up. But one of the things I was really interested to find out about in other interviews that I heard you do was this whole thing with the Harmony Project. I think that
Oh,
I think that is like the coolest thing, where you're literally going into area jails and prisons and bringing music into that environment. What an amazing thing that must be? I mean, not just for you personally, but just for the guys that are the people who are in that environment. It's got to be really fulfilling for everybody involved.
Yeah, I was in the Pickaway and Madison prisons this morning and this afternoon. Before we got on, I got home like an hour before you and I started talking. And for me, playing music every day is a way of life. And then you go to play music and sing with incarcerated people, and you realize that music is really, it's a builder of bridges, and it helps people get through the day, whether they're playing it or they're listening to it or they're writing it or recording it. And it's only deepened my appreciation. And those guys are just as excited to see us as we are to see them. And then we get together and we start singing songs and playing music, and it's just really like, also with Laura's immune system compromised, I don't go out as much. In fact, I don't go out at all. I go out to the grocery store and I go to the pharmacy and I go to my studio, and because I have to protect her from
Of course, yeah.
all the COVID and everything flying around, but also I have to focus my time and attention on a lot of other things. And so when I go to Pickaway in Madison and get to play music with these guys, it's kind of like my social getaway for the week as well. And we spend a lot of time talking. Most of the time we spend singing and playing music, but we also get to mix it up and get to know each other. And I've met some incredibly talented and wonderful people through the whole thing. And I mean, there was one concert. This is some kind of like vision of a utopian vision or something. But there was one concert that Harmony Project did where a judge was singing the solo with a local judge who also sings with us, who's an incredible singer. She sang a solo, and then one of the incarcerated men who happened to be sentenced by her, they got him out for the day. He came and he sang a Donny Hathaway song and just brought down the house.
Wow.
I mean, they're both singing leads on the same show, on the same stage. And that's the beautiful thing about music, is it's just like, we're just all people, and we all love music, and what a beautiful thing that is. It brings the beauty and joy of music really to the community. And it is, like you say, it's really an incredible experience. I'm so impressed and grateful, Mike, that you really know all this stuff.
Listen,
I've been listening to your podcast and really enjoying the way that you know the stories of the people you're talking to. I really am
I appreciate.
I'm so honored, man.
Listen,
Really
I appreciate that. And the thing, when I heard you talk about the Harmony Project again, it was in another interview, and I heard what it was all about. I'm going, that is just about the most awesome thing I've ever heard. And I did not want to get through this without bringing that up, because I think we often forget that the people that are that are serving their time are human beings, and music fills them as much as it does anybody else. And it is one of those things that brings us all together. So I appreciate you doing that work, but I'm also happy you listen to the podcast too. That's pretty cool too.
Oh yeah, I listened to just in the past couple of days to the Tracy Bonham and Angelo Moore and Andy Summers. I've been playing solo shows a lot, and house concerts, like outdoor ones where people don't have to wear masks and stuff. And last year I started playing at home. I started playing Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic. So Andy Summers, and the Police, and also Fishbone. We had some incredible times with Fishbone, with Royal Crescent Mob, and you talking about Fishbone, I totally related to, because you talked about in the day in the Powerhouse live performance. I just remember the first time seeing them, and my head exploded. I just like, they do the horn lines and then throw the horns up in the air. The roadies would catch them. They'd be back on the mic by the time the instruments had, come back to planet Earth.
I've seen them, headline shows. I've seen them open shows, and I don't know how any band followed that band. And I don't, and I've seen it time and the funniest one, I think I mentioned this because I've talked to Angelo twice. The first time I talked to him, I mentioned this. It was Summerfest in Milwaukee, and they opened for the Violent Femmes. Now, the Violent Femmes are a Milwaukee band. You would think, well, that would be great, but Fishbone mopped the floor with that play. How
Yeah.
you go on stage and play, Blister in the Sun after Fishbone has blown the place up. I would have gone home. I would have gone home and said, you know what? We're not playing tonight. No, that's not. We'll go to some other club.
No doubt about it. God, I mean, watching those guys really, like, it was just, I was stunned into silence. Like, my mouth was just wide open and my eyes were wide open watching them. And it just,
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. So I appreciate you talking about them and having that shared experience.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to ask you about, and this is something that I saw recently. It was actually the thing that made me say, okay, I got to go find Happy Chichester. I have to go and ask him about this because I thought this was like one. It was great to hear your name being mentioned by a major artist, and it was like, oh my God, that guy appreciates him too. There was an interview that was done by Dave Grohl, and he was mentioning you at one point. I don't know where or when this was, but that at one point he had approached you about joining the Foo Fighters, and he was very specific about Happy Chichester is one of the great American musicians, an amazing songwriter. He even mentioned you going to the hospital at Corporation Enema by name, and I thought I got to hear what the story is about this. What did happen, and why didn't eventually happen?
Um, I had heard that Dave was a fan in the Nirvana days,
Yeah,
actually, because Monty Temple was our sound engineer, our sound guy for Royal Crescent Mob, and hence the Ballad of Monty Temple on Omerta. And Monty, he lived fairly close to Stashes, which is like the big music hub in Columbus. And so after Nirvana played, the after hours was at Monty's place, and Dave showed up. And the day or two after that, we were heading out to play gigs, and they were talking about it. I didn't make it to the show because that was Laura and me we were inseparable, and we were probably we probably couldn't be roused from
sure.
from our lair, our love nest. But so that's the reason I didn't go see Nirvana, but at Stashes. But Dave's at Monty's place, and he's like, "Hey, you think Happy's gonna show up or anything like?" And I thought when Monty and those guys were telling me about this, I thought that they were pulling my leg. I thought because I just thought that was some band stuff. But
Sure.
I was playing with the Whigs in '94 out in Washington State. Chris Novoselic, I think he and some others, they had this big concert called Jam Pack. I think it was like some sort of political action committee or something, but it was a big concert. And it was one of the first Foo Fighters concerts. And Dooley was friends with Dave's first wife, and she came back to the dressing room and asked me. She goes, I just remember her saying, "Happy, can I introduce you to Dave? He's such a fan, you wouldn't even believe it." And I just was, I had put that out of my head. So when I first met Dave Grohl, it was as meeting a fan, because even though he was like one of the biggest rock stars on the planet, he treated me like like he was meeting Led Zeppelin or something. It was incredible, and I just remember him being really energized and hopped up. And then we'd see each other over the years a few times. I would go to like see the Foo Fighters, or we would see each other. I remember seeing him at the HF Festival in DC, and then he started calling me on the phone. I know in like '97 or something like that, I still had Howlin Maggie going, and he called me a couple times about. I mean, talk about crazy for me. I'm just like, the phone caller ID says Dave Grohl, and or Laura's saying, "Hey, Happy, Dave Grohl's on the phone," and pick up the phone. And he first, before pitching me on the Foo Fighters thing, he had this idea about doing an album with me and Louise Post and him and Black Francis.
Oh
We
my
were all going
God.
to write three songs and go in and record it all in 2 weeks. And I said, yes, I want to do this. Yes.
Sure.
But then that never happened. But then I guess it was like, '99 or something. he called, and then he sent me this FedEx package with a letter and a CD. It was songs that they were working on for the third Foo Fighters album, and he wanted me to come down to his house outside of DC and record. And then because we talked on the phone a little bit, but I was in the thick of recording the second Howlin Maggie, of finishing that record Hide. And so I think that he just backed off, because I don't think he, especially knowing then that Carlton was involved. I can't speak for Dave, but I think he just backed off, and it might have been for the best anyway. I mean, they got, they got Pat Smear, they got Chris. I mean, he's got incredible musicians, and I don't know if I could even hold a candle, but and plus I'm really focused on, I'm really so focused on writing my own songs and singing my own stuff. I love Dave, and I still want to record with him. It still is sort of a burr in my saddle that we still haven't hung out together in a recording studio and jam, just and sometimes I'll text him just to pester him a little bit, but I still haven't pestered him enough to actually get him. And even like a few years ago, like, yeah, I came back from this long walk, and I've got this text message on the phone, and it's Dave. He's like, check your email. I just wrote you a really long email. And I find this email, and he's attached a video where he's driving in his truck, and he's going to the hospital, and he's singing it. And then he texted me in 2019. I was supposed to go out there and record with him and work with him. And then that didn't happen either. So let's put together a lobbying campaign to get Dave and me in the studio together, because it's one of my dreams. He's a force of nature. He is so talented and so funny, and just, oh my God, to be in the studio just jamming and recording. He introduced me to John Paul Jones. I got to meet John Paul Jones, who's one of my musical heroes, big musical heroes. I mean, bassist, keyboardist, sometime keyboardist. I mean, that was my role in Royal Crescent Mob. So I may have never even mentioned that explicitly, but Dave, I think, intuited it. Like, so he's like, calls me up. He's like, I want to introduce you to John Paul Jones. And I'm like, yes, man. And Dave is just, when he had that magazine guy call me to interview me, and he put my name on the cover of the magazine, like by King Crimson. Mike, I'm telling you, like that, and then like doing this with you guys make me feel famous, and it's just a great feeling. It's really an amazing feeling that you did some music that brought some people some pleasure. Is just about one of the best feelings in life. It has to be.
Well, I have to tell you, Happy, this has been a real joy to talk to you. And like I said, your music has been one of those things that I always reach back for. I always go back to. And it's there's only a handful of artists that I can say I do that regularly, but you are among them. And so I so appreciate the time. And if there's anything I can do to push that Dave Grohl Happy Chichester thing along, let me know. I'll be happy to help.
Thank you. There's one picture on your YouTube channel. You've got this XTC album in the background, and it's so funny. When I first saw that, and I just looked behind me, and I saw my wife has the exact album. I could look like exactly. It was just a parallel. And also in the photograph, you're like the spitting image of my brother too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I showed it to her, and like, doesn't that look like Pat? She's like, yeah. So and also just wow. I mean, your podcast, Mike, you're encyclopedic, not only in knowledge, but you can tell that you're a real music lover, and those are my favorite people in the whole wide world.
Well, I really appreciate that, and coming from you, it's a hell of a compliment. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been a blast. I really appreciate it. Best of luck. I hope things go great with your wife. I hope she is back on the mend, and best of luck to both of you.
Thank you so much, man.
Absolutely. Nice to meet you.
You too.
All right, take care now. You can find a lot of Happy Chichester's music on his Bandcamp page, and I strongly suggest looking for both Howlin Maggie and the Royal Crescent Mob. It's freaking amazing and totally worth searching around for. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. You can email me at bax@rock102.com. I'd love to hear what you thought about today's episode, or any episode for that matter. Thanks again to Metro Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram at Chicopee for their support. And most of all, thanks to you for listening to Baxie's Musical Podcast.